Hello, and welcome back to the Survivor's Mic podcast. I'm your host, Posh, and I'm happy that we're on episode 8. So this week I want to talk about something called the purposeful pain. And I know, those two words most probably can't be in the same sentence, but I want you to stay with me on this one. So over the week I've been thinking and asking questions around, could it be that every experience that we have as human beings has a purpose in life, right? And I know that, I don't know about other people, but I know for me, there have been seasons where I feel like my life has been too much, and I don't want to listen to anybody who tells me anything around the context of, being called by God, being different, being separated, being chosen. Hence, I have to go through, or I had to endure the things that I went through in life. But I think there's truth in that. I think there's so much truth in it. And if for those of you who are Christian, when you look at most people or most patriarchs in the Bible, they have very interesting stories. And, whether they were successful in their call or they were not, most of them went through, interesting stuff in life. And I was reminded this week of Joseph, right? And I think of the guy as, it's okay to have enemies in life. It's a normal thing. But when they come from your own household, under the same roof, this is too hard to handle. And I always try to imagine a scenario where, how we seek or even experience, a supernatural encounter, or you have an encounter with God or Jesus, which is quite common, right? And I try to imagine an encounter where, Joseph would have been sitting with Jesus or with God, in the context of the Old Testament, right? And then he says to him, yeah, you're going to make it into politics in a foreign land, actually, but you're going to pass through the pit. And the pit is orchestrated by your brothers, by your own blood. He would have said, you know what? I've never wanted to be a politician to start with. It's okay. I don't want to be in there, right? and life can be interesting in the sense that when you really want to look at it, most of the pain that is inflicted in our lives, it's barely from outside. It's usually from the inside. People who are closer to you, people who are supposed to be family to you, right? And why is that? I know for me, personally, all my childhood trauma that until today, God knows if it wasn't for His grace, I have no idea where I would be. And it all came out of my own household, right? Because I grew up in an extended family, and somehow it was a dysfunctional one. And, you try your best as a child, and you want to be loved and you want to be acknowledged, which is a natural thing because children are just children. And I spent years wondering and asking myself a lot of questions, right? Why did this abuse happen to me? Because I always thought I'm a great person, and this is interesting because I've gone through so many seasons of life where I stop and I'm like, am I a bad person? Did I do something wrong? But one thing that you will not run away from is the idea of your destiny and who you are meant to be, right? So this week was more interesting, and it forced or pushed me to think about this because I'm in this season where I'm preparing to be on the world stage, and I get to talk about, surviving childhood trauma, surviving abuse. And it's the first time in my life I had to stop, and I was like, oh, hold on a minute. So it turns out my life is not just about me, huh? It goes beyond just the person that I am. And I think that's just something powerful about that. And I want to be honest, it had never happened in my life that I stopped for a moment and I said, hold on, this has been purposeful pain. It had its own goal, because when I look at myself and everything I've gone through, and I totally acknowledge every form of pain that people go through, and I'm grateful that I'm able to actually stop and take some time and listen when people talk about their experiences and their pain and their trauma. And I don't want to believe that if I had not had my own share of what that is, I would know how to handle that when somebody comes to me, and not that they look for solutions, but it happens a lot in my life that people find it just easier to open up and to talk about whatever they want to talk about to me pertaining their lives, right? And so, outside of, absolutely, I'm not the perfect human being that exists, but I think there's something about purpose, there's something about destiny that is brewed or prepared in those spaces or in those seasons where things tend to be tough, where you ask, you question yourself, you question your whole journey, you question even God himself. I mean, I've had moments like that. I don't even shy away from those, where I've stopped and I'm like, hold on a minute. I didn't even ask for this, Grown-ups made decisions for themselves that affected me. I don't get how I'm the one who has to suffer over those decisions that were made on my behalf as a child, right? And I think the most disturbing thing, which I know I'm going to talk about at some point or as a different episode in the future, is just how grown-ups, and now I'm part of the statistics, right? I'm a grown-up now. How the decisions we make mold and affect, children, and not only children when they are just children, but as they get to grow up and become adults, right? So I've spent 3 decades of my life, and I'm trying to navigate through life, and I'm trying to find answers to questions that nobody has ever answered me about. And it's tough. It's tough. And as long as you're a survivor sitting and listening to this, you know that it's tough. It's not easy. And sometimes you barely even come to a place of saying, okay, I finally come to the final destination of healing from this and figuring out how to navigate through this. It's fluctuating. Sometimes you're good, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're doubting again. Sometimes you feel like you have to redo the whole healing process again. But ultimately, for me, at least personally, when I have certain conversations with people who are hurting, people who are broken, people who have been betrayed, I look at myself and I think, hang on, that's why I went through that. Because now, before I even open up my mouth to try and offer some support or motivate someone, because naturally for most people, or at least extroverted people, we're naturally motivating people, right? But before I come in with all those poetic statements or those general Christian, Christ-like sounding statements to just try and make someone better, I think one thing I've learned over the years is to allow people to breathe and to go through what they're going through. And I truly, truly believe that I wouldn't be able to do that if my history wasn't an abusive one, if my history wasn't one of fighting and working so hard on trying to turn over a new leaf and live again after so much abuse, after so much betrayal, after abandonment, rejection, and the list goes on and on. So I don't know, it's just something that I have been playing over and over again in my mind, like, could there be a purpose behind all this pain? And as I sat down and I was writing my speech, I remember this thought coming to my head, this has been the end result of all those things that I went through. Because I will be honest, if somebody had invited me on the table to say, we want you to come here and talk about survival, I'm sorry, I'm Christian. Did you hear me trying to say revival? I'm Christian and I'm a preacher. So I preach sometimes. So there you go. Another getting to know me statement. But anyways, if I had been invited to come and speak about survival and my past and my childhood was not as it was, I think I would have had a hard time doing that. I would have even turned it down and said, you know what? No, I can't do that. But the more these invites and the more all these opportunities are coming, my way, I'm taking a moment back and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, I get it. I get it now, because when I stand there, I'll surely get the words. I'll surely know what to say or what to talk about, because I've been there. I've walked that path before. And it doesn't mean that everything has been forgotten, everything has been put under the rag and we turned a new leaf and we're living again. But it just means that the more I live, the more I grow up, the more I learn and teach myself how to live life. Not forgetting what happened before, but how to live life even with all those things being existent in my mind and in my brain. This idea of compartmentalizing things and taking all these experiences, the past, the present, and the future, and placing them in their own place in my brain so that I'm able to live in the now and I'm able to prepare and embrace the future as it comes. So this is what I had for you this week, and I will be so happy if you can let me know what your thoughts are around this theory that I've been thinking about of purposeful pain, and if you really believe that there is something like that. And I know most likely if you are in your season of the pain being inflicted on you, it might be tough for you to embrace this. And I want to urge you to let it be. If you don't feel like, focusing on this topic at the moment, that's totally fine. You don't have to think about it. But one thing that I pray and hope for you is a day would come, something would happen for you, not to you, but something would happen for you that you would stop and you would realize that your pain was purposeful. I appreciate you all for being here, and feel free to send us messages on our main podcast TikTok page, and it's called The Survivor's Mic. Or you can also send messages directly on Spotify or whichever podcast platform that you listen to us from, and we'll be glad to have conversations with you there. I'm your host, Posh, and I will see you next week.